I'm excited to welcome today Dr. Kevin Gazzara, CEO of Magna Leadership Solutions. He's a management and leadership expert, executive positive intelligence coach, and that's our topic for today, as well as a professor, speaker, author, and past employee at one of our big local companies here, Intel, here in Chandler, Arizona. Worked there for 18 years, where his BS in engineering, I'm sure, served him well as his MBA and doctorate in organizational leadership. Thank you, Kevin, so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Marie. Glad to be here, and I hope I can give some good information to your listeners.
I'm sure you will. I know when I first heard the term positive intelligence, and then with that, the acronym PQ, I immediately thought, okay, I've heard of IQ and EQ, emotional quotient. So this whole positive intelligence with the PQ was intriguing to me. Whenever I have guests on my podcast, I kind of challenge them to think about 3 key takeaways that we can help our listeners glean from our conversation today. And so I'm asking you that as well on the positive intelligence side. 3 key takeaways you're hoping our listeners get out of our conversation.
Well, I hope that they can get an understanding of the importance of really having this positive mindset. Second thing is to get a deeper understanding, as much as we can do in 25 minutes or so, about the power of positive intelligence. And then third is how do you get started, today, and to increase your personal and professional success? What can you do immediately? It's always nice to have information, but if you can't take action on it immediately, then what value is it?
Exactly. Thank you. I'm glad we're on the same page there. So let's start with this positive mindset. What is it exactly, and why is it so important?
Many people talk about a positive mindset, and I think there's this misconception that a positive mindset is just looking at it as everything is happy and great and there's nothing wrong and so forth. And that's probably a very small portion of it. If you read the positive intelligence book, or maybe some of the listeners have already taken the assessment that was posted earlier at www.pqtrainingandcoaching.com, they may have recognized some of the things that are contributing and taking away from their positive intelligence. But what I would say is the biggest difference about positive mindset, true positive mindset, is really looking at things as opportunities rather than as threats or problems. It's being able to look at something and look for the gift or the possibility in it, as opposed to just thinking everything's great and we have to play nice. That is not a positive mindset. A positive mindset means I'm looking for the future, I'm looking in a way that's hopeful, and I'm bringing both of my sage as well as my wisdom and experience to be able to take that journey with myself or with others.
Boy, is that timely, right? With all that's gone on in the world, COVID related, and then the domino effect after that. I know when I read the book, I was blown away by the impact it can have on your life and the difference it makes in your life by having that positive mindset.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I read the book about a year ago, and then I took the 6-week positive intelligence course focused on coaches. And I just finished my certification for it a couple of weeks ago, and it was really life-changing. And I will tell you, as a professor, and particularly when I did all my doctoral work in organizational leadership, I read all of the books on emotional intelligence, by Daniel Goleman and Howard Gardner. There's wonderful, wonderful stuff out there. And the big challenge for me was always that stuff from an academic perspective was really interesting. It was somewhat complex and difficult to communicate to others. And what Shirzad Chamine, who is the author of Positive Intelligence, has done is he's really taken it and he's made it very, very simple so you can understand it, and more importantly, be able to take action on it right away.
So let me just share my ahas from the book before we shift into, okay, everybody's interest is probably peaked, and so we're wondering, how do we shift to that positive outlook? Sounds easy, but really is very challenging to do. But our positive intelligence quotient, our PQ, from a how will it impact my life standpoint, will actually help determine our potential in life, our happiness, and how healthy our relationships are. I kind of took those notes from the book, but that to me was, I want to absolutely know more.
Well, and the other thing is that it sounds almost hawkish, right? Like you're trying to sell something that's not even possible to get. And there is a good formula. I think the one thing that Shirzad has done with the Positive Intelligence book, and if people haven't read it, I'm going to make a strong recommendation to read it, because as you found, it's so simple to see that he is taking, and he's moved from a descriptive mode, which many of academics do, which I'm probably guilty of doing that myself, and he's made it prescriptive. So there is a roadmap for you that you can start using right away that's understandable, whether you're a CEO or whether you're taking care of rooms at a Hyatt.
So just to help our listeners think about even getting started, what would you say is a good thing to be aware of in order to even start shifting to a more positive mindset?
In the book, Shirzad talks about there's really two minds, right? There's what he calls the sage perspective, and on the other side, there's the saboteur perspective. And those are his terms, not mine. And in between, you have something called the PQ brain, or your mental fitness. And the analogy I like to use is it's really the air traffic controller. On the one side of your brain, you have these saboteurs, and there's one big saboteur, which is called your judge. And then there's 9 other saboteurs, which are the controller, the hyperachiever, restless.
There's like 10 of them, right? There's a lot of them.
Stickler, the pleaser, the hypervigilant, the avoider, the victim, the hyper-rational. I don't know if those sound familiar or anybody can just relate to them just from the name. I certainly could as soon as I read that. So you have these voices in your head. I'm not talking about like psychotic voices here. I'm just talking about these voices, with the judge kind of being the overarching saboteur. And then you have all of these other ones working together to basically try to distract you or lead you away or prevent you from moving forward. And I think the key is once you recognize that there is a purpose for them, because they will highlight issues, the key is to not to stay in the mode where you're spending all the time fighting them, and it's to move over to what's known as your sage perspective. That's where the PQ brain, or your mental fitness, comes into, where your air traffic controller is moving you over to what's called in the book your sage power. And there's really 5 sage powers that you can have. It's 1, the empathize power. 2 is exploring, kind of looking at things differently. The innovate power, which is continuing to look at what they call the yes and, just moving forward, like there's always a little bit more in what people are suggesting. There's the navigate power, which is the 4th one, which is kind of looking forward of kind of what's possible. And then the last power, which I think is the most important, particularly as a leadership professor, is the activate power. It's really preempting the saboteurs, letting them stay there, and moving over to use all the wisdom and knowledge and experience that you have. Most people have much more than they think they have, and it's being able to share that in a very positive way that makes a difference.
I found it really fascinating, and I shouldn't be so surprised, but so often where we are today with our saboteurs or our sage or our habits, whether we're talking about positive mindset or even something else, so often seems to go back to childhood. And that was one thing that Shirzad explained in his book, was to help us, I think, number one, not feel guilty that we have these saboteurs. It was really our childhood mind trying to figure out how to cope in whatever environment you grew up in and experienced through. So that I found really interesting.
It is very important to understand that nature and nurture, right, on how you've brought up, as well as genetics and so forth, really do shape who you are. And I think they say that you're pretty much shaped by the time you're 5 to 7 years old. And one of the things that's stressed in the Positive Intelligence book that Shirzad talks about is that you want to use those, you want to re-envision those times in particular where you were using one of your sage powers, whether you're doing activate or innovate or any one of the 5 powers, of how can you tap into that and bring it forward. And it doesn't mean that there weren't times in your childhood were challenging. I'll say challenging because it's different for everyone. The key is that there's usually many, many more times that are positive. The true you has come out, and this book will help you kind of understand that and value it as well.
So to start with an assessment, this PQ assessment, to identify your positive intelligence quotient, I forget, the goal is like 75. You're trying to get to the having 3 positive thoughts for every negative from a positive outlook standpoint.
Exactly. When you go to the assessment that's on our site, it'll give you a kind of a 2-minute process to kind of fill it in. And then you go on to the main site and you'll take 2 assessments on there. The first one is, as you've mentioned, is the PQ, or the Positive Intelligence Assessment. And you'll get a score from 0 to 100, right? And what the research has said, and it's not only Shirzad's research, Dr. Richard Boyatzis at Case Western, Daniel Goleman, Howard Gardner, many of these well-known researchers have statistically determined that, as you've described, what you really need is a 3-to-1 type of ratio. And a 75 out of 100 gives you that ability where it says, if you score a 75, Shirzad says, man, you are right in a great place to be incredibly successful. Because what it says is your sage brain, on the one side of the air traffic control, is set up for looking forward, looking positively, looking at using your past experiences in a very positive way. So when that other 25%, which is your saboteurs, show up, that you have, as you've described, this 3-to-1 ratio, a 75 to a 25. And when you hit that magic ratio, something incredible happens. And what happens is you start working together with the saboteurs, where they're the trigger, but the sage takes over, right? So you're bringing the things in and you're looking forward and so forth. So you can get that through the website that you had posted, or I think we'll mention it at the end as well. And that should just take a couple minutes. And that's the first of the 2 assessments. And the assessments are free, by the way. So I love that he is doing that. And the second assessment is the saboteur assessment. As I mentioned earlier, some of those saboteurs may sound very familiar to you, whether you're restless or hypervigilant or the pleaser or the victim or whatever it is. And it'll ask you a whole series of questions. It takes maybe 4 minutes or so, 4 or 5 minutes. And it will give you your report instantaneously. And it will say, by the way, here are your saboteurs that are the loudest, and it'll give you a 0 to 10 scale. So in full disclosure, as a background in science and engineering, and my hyper-rational, my ability to try to rationalize everything is my number 1 saboteur. It just takes over, and it just says to me, take a breath, Kevin. Let's look at what's happening with this team or the other people, and how do I slow down enough and try to empathize first and understand, make that emotional connection, because once that's done, then I can make that problem-solving connection. And problem solver, that's what I really enjoy doing. The key is to make sure that once you understand your PQ, you know how to enter into the conversation instead of what we typically do, which is our saboteurs take over, and it says, okay, you can solve this problem by doing this and this and this and this and this, ready, go. And that other person sitting on the other side of you may be completely distraught. Being able to recognize the need for that, taking the breath before you launch into this and this and this and this, is the key for relationships and everything else. We did a lot of research early on with our company, Magna Leadership Solutions. When I retired from Intel in 2007, we surveyed 1,200 leaders around the world. And the one thing that we found out was that the number 1 problem, no matter what country, no matter what level you were at, was communication. And the better we can get at communication, the better we can make the world.
So now you're talking about the what's in it for me. Listeners are thinking, okay, it's a free assessment. Great, sounds interesting. But there's also going to be some influence on your future if you do find out where you are and then learn about some of these pivots, these shifts that you can make for a more positive mindset.
It's incredibly easy to use, very understandable. I've had my whole family go through that. And I don't know if anybody listening has kids or teenagers in particular. It really has changed my level of conversation with them. being able to use the same language, the same terms. They've all gone through the 6-week program as well. They went through it without their dad, of course, had them use another facilitator because I didn't want to bias them. It's really helped, and they've appreciated it. I've appreciated it, and it goes back to the foundation we found from the research. How do you improve your communication? If you can get better at that, you can do nothing else but get better at communication. Life is good.
I know when I went through the course with you, what was interesting to me, especially interesting, was that I'm sure you have seen the positive outcome both personally and professionally. A lot of our pod discussions were on the personal side as well as the professional side. So this isn't just about leadership at work.
I think the thing we find is that many of the people, as we go through the pods, which are the small groups of 4 to 6, usually can be any level, right? Like my kids to, CEOs, we've had executive pods as well. The key is that most people come in for that. They want that change. They've hit that plateau in their career. They want to get to the next level. They want to make a change. They don't know how to do that, or they're having problems with managing your team or whatever. There's lots of professional stuff that's going on. The number one thing that we get for feedback is that I didn't realize how much this would have affected my home life and my relationships with my significant other and kids.
It's all about relationships, no matter where it is, right? Or at home or at work.
It always comes down to that, doesn't it?
So is it the relationship change that people are recognizing when they're saying, okay, how do I know if this is working? Oh, it's working with the relationships at work and at home?
I think there's a lot of artifacts or feedback systems you'll instantly be able to recognize whether it's working. The number one way that Shirzad talks about in the book that you'll recognize is when you kind of get into that negative space. Something bad has happened. You're kind of doing this downward spiral. As you go through the program, what we ask the participants to do is, when you've been in that space, before working through positive intelligence, how long did it take you to come out of that funk, right? An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? Research says with a significant piece of negative feedback, you lost a contract, or the market has dropped 1,000 points, or whatever it is, that typically it takes about 4 hours for people to recover, where their mind is at least open to moving forward. And then a lot of times you get hit with a second one, and next thing you know, your 8-hour day is completely shot. And you come home and you're miserable and you're not thinking positively, and all opportunities are gone. It's just problems. So I think the big thing is that you can see that the recovery time is faster. And now, because you have a scorecard of understanding what saboteurs are attacking you, trying to give you that, you have a toolbox and how to address them.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that a little. I'm assuming we're piquing the listeners' interest on wanting to understand where they are. And then once they know that, what do they do with it going forward? There's the book, Positive Intelligence, to read. Right. But beyond that, how should somebody be aware of where can they go from there from a PQ standpoint?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, it's pretty straightforward. Read the book, regardless of whether you're going to take the course or not. It's so well written. Shirzad has Shirzad's story in there, as well as lots of great tips. Go take the 2 assessments. You can do both of them in under 10 minutes, and it'll give you a great point of reference. And then the book will make a whole lot more sense. And if you want to take it to the next level, you can take a course like you have done, which is a 6-week course that you get to see videos from Shirzad. You work in small groups, in groups of 4 to 6. We usually do a lot of executive groups. You get me as a facilitator, where we link this to leadership. So there's this 6-week course that's available. It's all done online. It's both asynchronous and synchronous. And you get me, or a facilitator like me. Sign up for our course, you get me. So I am the certified facilitator for this. And you can do that by going to pqtrainingandcoaching.com, and you can see all the details of the course right there. And then the other thing that we do is, once a month, if you do go to the site, there'll be a pop-up. You put your name in there, and then you'll be invited. We do once a month. You probably remember, because you went to it. We do once a month. Usually, I think it's the third Wednesday of every month, we do an intro session to kind of explore what positive intelligence looks like prior to our next group. And we run the pods, or the 6-week sessions, every 6 weeks. We just started one about a week and a half ago. Our next one starts on the 5th of April, and then 6 weeks after that, we'll do another one. And I only do one at a time so I can keep the focus. So once it's filled, with up to 6 people, normally it's 5, we're glad to offer you the next pod to join.
I'm a raving fan. I can't tell you how I felt I was a pretty positive, outlook-minded person to begin with. My score was fairly high, and afterwards it was significantly higher. And I'm just finding the difference in daily practice, like you said, with all relationships. So why wouldn't somebody want more positivity in their lives was kind of my approach to this. And I was right. More is definitely better. So thank you, Kevin, for all you are doing. We'll have all of your contact information and how they can access the assessment and learn further from there in the show notes. But I so thank you for being with us today. You are doing great work.
Thanks, Marie. It's great to be a guest here, and I hope your listeners move forward with developing their own positive intelligence.
Absolutely.